Well, hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Marco. I work at Movify, and I'm really happy today to present Leon Jacobs, creative director at Movify. Round of applause, please. Uh, Leon Jacobs is the creative director at Emakina, and I'm not gonna spoil anything. He's gonna talk about storytelling. So, without further ado, you got the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before I start, I wanted to quickly check, like, just the audience. Like, I just wanted to see which of you guys are like UX designers. All right, service designers, or do you think there's? Oh, okay. And the rest, I'm just curious. Like, sorry, business consultants. All right. Okay. So I want to talk to you guys today about something that is really close to my heart and has been a part of my life and my upbringing and my career for the last 30 years. Just a little bit about me. I got into advertising, like proper above the line advertising, almost 30 years ago. I know you all look shocked because I look very young. But yeah, I got into advertising when everything was super simple. Like we would get a brief on our desks. Internet was dial-up. So I don't know if you know what that is, but we didn't always have internet. Like you had to actually dial it up and call it. But so briefs are super simple. Like we would be asked to create TV or radio, sometimes print. But it was just before the digital age started. So things were really simple. Well, we thought they were complicated, but things were really simple. And then this happened. The digital age started, and there's a writer who I'm hoping, I don't know if any of you have ever read his work. His name is Douglas Adams, and he's written books like he's written The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And if you haven't read it, I really suggest you read it. It is profound. It looks like science fiction. It looks like comedy, but it's actually a book of extreme philosophy, and was written it was written in the late 70s as a radio play, and then it became novels, then it became a computer game, but it is full of incredible things that are even relevant today. But Douglas Adams was an amazing thinker. Unfortunately, he died about 20 years ago. But he said something which is true, which is that he said when the digital age started, then everything before that was rivers. And when the digital age started, everything became an ocean. And we were the generation who was sailing rivers, and we understood how rivers worked. And suddenly we were in the ocean, and everything changed. It looked the same. It was water, it was wind, but everything was different. And so we had to make that transition. But certain things stayed the same. So certain things were never changed. And today, the projects that I work on, they look extremely different to what they did 30 years ago. Today, we are developing things for Apple Vision Pro or for Unreal Engine, but the rules are the same. The rules are the same. What made a good TV commercial is still relevant to what makes a good Vision Pro experience, what makes a good gaming experience or a good immersive experience. And that's a bit what I want to talk about today. And so I start with this, which is what I think is the 6 most powerful words in the English language, which is this. It's, let me tell you a story. Because the moment you say to somebody, let me tell you a story, it activates something in you, right? And if you just look at this, I mean, I think when I looked for images for this, I was blown away. How many books, how many articles, how many documentaries, how many collections of essays, poetry, they all have this title, Let Me Tell You a Story. Because the moment somebody tells you that, you're engaged. You go with them, you go along. And there's a reason for that, because as humans, we are wired for story. That is the one thing that binds us all together. Across language, across everything else, we are wired for story. And I think probably that's why I'm asking, just a cross-section of who you are, because for somebody like me who started as a copywriter and who worked in advertising, it's kind of like obvious storytelling is a part of my job. But I think probably for a lot of you guys, you think storytelling is just something on the periphery. But because I think the word story, we kind of understand it in a very limited way these days. So either we think of movies, we think of books, sometimes we even think of gaming, but there's this, and we think about just telling stories to each other. But there is something way more, like there are so many more stories that we're not even aware of. And I'm going to show you some that you may recognize, that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. So one of the most powerful stories in the world looks like this. Okay? Because that's just a piece of paper. Okay? We all look at that and we know what it is. We understand its value. We know what it can buy you. We know that if you walk into any kind of shop, a baker, a butcher, candlestick maker, you can say to whoever shop that is, you can say, here's this piece of paper and it's written 10 euros on it. And I want to change this piece of money for a piece of meat, for a cake, a bread, whatever the case may be. But it's just a piece of paper. The thing that makes this piece of paper work is the story that we tell each other. We just tell this to each other. This is not just invented by somebody else. This is a story we tell each other, that equals 10 euros. And then the person who gets the money, he takes that and he takes it to somebody else who says, hey, this is 10 euros. So this is just a fabrication. It's a lie. It's not real, but it's a story. Because it's real because we tell each other this story that that's 10 euros. Another one that it's the first time in my life I saw this when I was doing the research for this. This is the Constitution of Belgium. It's also just a story. But it is the thing that binds us all together in what is the law of this land. So nothing exists. Nothing exists in terms of the interaction that we have, the lawful interactions that we have with each other. It's just this document. It's what's written in there that is powering the story that makes the entire country work. What makes us interact, what determines what is lawful, what is unlawful. It's just a story, but it's a story that we all agree on. And here's another one. That's a story. And I don't mean specifically just this one. I'm saying this because this is you guys. But any company, any brand, this I don't mean necessarily in the sense of a brand. I'm talking about this particularly because I think people in our industry, and I count Emakina with this and this, that stands for something. And I feel it when I walk in here. You guys are bound by a culture, and you're bound by something that I feel it. I was saying to Marco, it feels really good. I mean, it's a really nice culture here, but it's determined by something that's in there that's not really real. It's something that a lot of you agree on. All of you agree on what the culture of this should be. Maybe it's to do with the way that you collaborate. Maybe it's to do with the way that you socialize together. Maybe it can be one of a million different things, but it's a story. It's a story that everybody agrees on. And therefore, it's real because you all agree on it. So, money, laws, corporate logos, manifestos, they're all stories, but they're real and they have value because we agree on them. And this thing of us agreeing on stories, it's what made us different to other animals. People think that Homo sapiens, us all, became the most important species on the planet because of our abilities to, I don't know, maybe because we were able to run for long distances and therefore we were able to hunt any kind of animal, or many different theories about why Homo sapiens became who it the apex species on the planet. But it's not. It's because because Neanderthals were also able to exchange language with each other. They were also able to converse with each other. But Homo sapiens had this thing in the front of their brains, in the frontal cortex, the ability to imagine together, the ability to tell stories to each other and say, we are going to do this together. And whether you are 2 people who agree on something, whether you are 5 people who start a company together who agree on something, or whether you are 1 or 2 billion Catholics who all agree on something and you all move in the same direction, even if you've never met each other, but you all agree on this one story that is true, you all move in the same direction because you're able to imagine the story together. That is the superpower that humans have. So this is a quote. I mean, I don't think I should go through the whole quote, but I don't know who of you have read this book. If you haven't, it's extremely powerful because in a snapshot, it tells you the history of why we got to where we did. It's sometimes a very depressing read because humans are capable of extreme violence towards one another, towards the planet and everything that lives on it. But humans are capable of so much beauty, so much imagination. And this quote is just beautiful. It's like fiction enables us not to imagine things collectively. And we can weave myths such as the biblical creation story, the Dreamtime myths of Aboriginal Australians, the national myths of modern states, and it gives us sapiens the unprecedented ability to cooperate flexibly in large numbers. Ants and bees can do the same. They can work together in huge numbers, but they do it in a very rigid way. They have a very rigid way of working together. But humans are flexible. Humans can adapt because of story. Wolves and chimpanzees can do the same. They can be more flexible, but they can only do that with small numbers. So this is what made us who we are. So I recommend this. So that's the theory. Now I want to make it practical. I want to bring it to the work that you do every day, and hopefully you will maybe contribute to the conversation as we go. It's my favorite Far Side cartoon of all time. I don't know if you can see it from the back, but it's a guy doing a cave painting, and his friend's ready to go hunting, and he says, "Enough storyboarding, let's shoot something." So enough storyboarding, enough talking about the theory. Let's talk about the practicality, because what I'm trying to tell you, what I'm trying to just plant a seed in your head tonight, is that in the work that you do every day, whether it's in design, whether it's in user experience, whether it's in service design, whether it's in technology, whether it's in building products, storytelling is one of the most key things. It's like the superpower that if you master it, will make a massive difference to your work, and if you think about it, also to your life. So here are some practical ways that storytelling can come alive in your work. So the first thing, and I wanted to use the most bland image that I can find of a user persona, because I think you've all been in workshops where there is some very one-dimensional images created of like personas that you are designing for. And that is the beauty of storytelling, is that it can actually change the way that you think about the person that you are going to create for. Because if you say, I'm designing for, I don't know, Nancy, who's 65, she lives in Waterloo, and these are her fears and hopes and whatever, that's one thing. But if you can really make somebody understand through characterization, through really delving into it, maybe it's somebody's grandmother, and it can actually become real for you who you are designing for. Your design, your product will become richer for it, because suddenly you have somebody in your head, a real living human being. And I often think about this, like one of the best writing tricks I've ever learned in my life was somebody taught me that if you're writing a piece of advertising copy, if you want to make it really strong, what you should do is you should think about the kind of person that should read that. Let's say, for example, I'm writing a piece of copy for, let's say, for example, for a Volkswagen newsletter, okay? If I sit down and write that, and I just go, so this is da 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 da, then it'll be just copy, right? It'll just be words on a page. If I sit down and I think, who is the person, that the closest person that I can imagine who would be reading this, that I know personally? So if it's, for example, Colleen, I would literally start with going at the top of the page, go, dear Colleen. And then I would write it as if I'm writing it to that one person. And then when I'm finished, I go to the top of the page and I delete dear Colleen and I submit it. And designing for user personas are exactly the same. The moment you can activate that person in your head, and through storytelling in a workshop or in a collaborative environment, if you can agree who that person is through storytelling, the products that you make will become so much richer. And it comes back to something that I know that is important to you guys as well, and it's important to us too. It's human and it's user centricity. And I love a Vitruvian man as a symbol of user centricity. I don't know how many of you know like why Da Vinci made the Vitruvian man. I will briefly explain it the best I can. So he made this because by designing this and getting the dimensions of a man's body, he was able to go, okay, if I have the width of his arms, the length of his body, I can calculate if I design a cathedral or a school or whatever building, if I design that, I can figure out how big the door should be. Should it be a double door? Then I know what the dimension should be. If it's a single door, I know. Then if I have the door, I know how high the roof should be. And if I know how high the roof is, I can design how big the window should be. But it all starts in this one place, like this person. That building, the cathedral, may be massive, but it's all designed around this one person who's in this wheel. So that's why I love this as a symbol of human centricity. It's a bit of story. The next thing that storytelling, of course, can activate is in user journeys. So when I started working with service designers and service design processes, the first thing that struck me was that user journeys are like novels. So if you're a writer, they're a bit like constructing a plot of a story. So the user persona becomes like the main character in the story. And then the user journey is how do you navigate through all the challenges? So it's a bit like in a novel or in a movie where you go, you're going to encounter this challenge and this challenge, but you know what the happy ending should be. You know where your character should end up to be happy. And so that's a bit like this. It's not just post-its on a wall, it's actually creating a story. Onboarding narratives. So, and I'm speaking to people here I think who know more about this than me, but there are some amazing examples of people out there building products that make incredible onboarding narratives. And one of the ones that I think are the most powerful, maybe you have examples of others, I would love to hear them in the Q&A, but Duolingo has really, really strong onboarding narratives. They use storytelling in a really strong way to get people on board. And the other day, I was listening to a TED talk with a founder of Duolingo. And I recommend that I can send a link to Marco, you can send it to you guys to listen to, because hearing him talk about why they made Duolingo and how they think about the product and its role that it should play in society is phenomenal. And then you start seeing how they use storytelling to keep people engaged, to make sure that people keep learning and stay in this hot process of learning a difficult language like French, which don't get me started. And then in smaller things, like for example, like just like micro interactions, something that feels like a really small icon or a small little thing that the app or a product should do, but like turning them into something that's fun and like actually becomes like a narrative in itself. I'm not sure that's the best example, but it was the best one that I could find. But you understand what I'm saying, right? Like you can do something really delightful and storytelling in micro interactions that you have with the user. And I once worked on a brand that had this this phrase that they kept saying to each other. They kept saying, we should surprise and delight, surprise and delight, surprise and delight. And I love that. It's like, we should often surprise people. And then when we surprise them, make them smile. Just, that was really nice. I like that. That's smooth. It's nice. Apple, I mean, we can talk about Apple for a long time, but I remember the first time I tried macOS 10 or X or whatever you want to call it. And the first time I saw the windows animate, or the way when you moved the mouse over the dock and it animated and it magnified. It was, again, I'm showing my age here, but it was amazing. It was really amazing. They do that in other smaller ways as well. So small interactions. When you open a box and it says designed by Apple California, it's incredible. When you now buy an iPhone or a watch, the way it pairs with all the other devices in your ecosystem, the way it exchanges information, it's incredible. They've really thought about like surprising and delighting you, and they make the animations amazing. It's, yeah, there's a lot to be done, and it's in detail, right? It's like really in detail. And then of course the most obvious one is gamification elements. So like, I mean, that is a running app. It's called Run Zombie, right? Do you know this app? It's basically a running app like Strava or whatever else, but it's basically got the whole narrative of zombies. So when you want to go for a run, you're basically always running away from zombies. And it's very successful. It's very cool. So we talked about the 6 most powerful words in the English language. I now want to show you the 3 most powerful words in the English language in combination with each other's. And it's that. I think in design, what you guys do, that's the 3 most powerful, provocative words that you can say to each other. How might we? So I can tell many stories about this, how I've seen how this question unlocks workshops, unlocks the direction that something goes into. But I'm going to tell you a very cool story. And it's a story of 2 loungers, right? So I have a friend, and this guy he's an advertising planner, like a communication planner, a brand planner. So he has this amazing story. He used to work on the brand Virgin directly with Richard Branson. So he was telling me the story of how he was once at Charles de Gaulle Airport. He was flying Air France. He was lucky enough to have a business class ticket, so he was sitting in the business class lounge at Charles de Gaulle Airport. And it looks like that. It's amazing. It's beautiful. So he said he sat there and he thought, being an advertising person, he was kind of like imagining what the brief was to the designers. And he said it's really obvious when you look at it. It's chic. It reflects the brand values of Air France. It's sophisticated. You can feel it, like it's good design, right? And he said while he was thinking about that, he remembered the brief that Richard Branson gave a team of designers when they first designed the upper class lounge for Virgin at Heathrow Airport. And his brief was just this: how might we make a place that people want to miss their flight for? And so they made this cool place. They made a place with pool tables. They made a place that people wanted to hang out in and spend as much possible time in. So within that how might we is a massive human truth. And if you're a designer and somebody says to you, design me a place that people want to miss their flight for, you'll be inspired, right? You'll really want to make something special. That's a very clear, simple brief. And actually, just on a side note, what's really strong about it is it doesn't tell you how to do the job. It just tells you what the outcome should be. It tells you what the effect should be. And that is worth more than anything, right? Because too many briefs tell us how something should be done, and us as creative people, we feel we want to reject that, right? Like paradoxically, we want to step away from it. I want to tell you another story, and this one's a little bit more personal. It's a story about air. So I have a very good friend who I've been friends with since we were 6 years old and in school together, not so long ago. So he's way smarter than me. He's a chemical engineer, and so we grew up in South Africa. When we finished school, actually something, so he went to university and I went to advertising to ruin my life. And he went to university to become a chemical engineer. But he's so smart that he got his first degree cum laude. And then he was invited by an American university to come and study there. So he got a PhD at one of the top universities in America. So, but the thing is, he got a bursary from a South African kind of parastatal organization that actually has done some incredible technological things. Like, for example, as you know, South Africa has a very complicated history because of the previous regime. And for many years, nobody wanted to sell oil to South Africa. So actually, this company, this parastatal, developed a technology to just take coal, normal coal, and turn it into oil because nobody wanted to sell oil. So they made petrol out of coal. And there's actually one town in this country which is dedicated to them. And so when he received his PhD, because he had a bursary from them, they made him come back and do a job as a junior engineer there. And that's a bit what that place looks like, right? It's super industrial, and the air is filthy. It's really disgusting because it's very industrial. It like pumps out horrible gases into the air every day. And so eventually he managed to get himself out of there, and they sent him to the States to build some new things, etc. Then he left them, and he had this vision of starting a new, like a startup. And now he's developed like a reactor that takes earth gas that we use to heat our homes, etc. And he turns that into hydrogen, which companies can use in their manufacturing, and hydrogen is difficult to make, so that's like a really great thing. But he struggled to get it off the ground. And he was here about a year or two ago, and he was telling me this thing. He said, like, you know, I struggle, like I really didn't know how to tell like VCs or, you know, like angel funders or whatever. I didn't know how to explain it to him. Everything felt so rational and technical. And then he said, I decided to start telling a personal story about my upbringing and how I had to go work in this town every day and wake up, and my children were waking up in the smoke. And he said, then I realized, because as you know, 4 years ago, we lived through a pandemic. And I don't know if you remember, but everything stopped. And because everything stopped, the air cleared. Do you remember that? Like everything became, like I used to live close to Zaventem Airport. The planes stopped flying. Like there were more birds around. You could hear more birds. Everything was just better, right? And so that image, I think, explains it. And he said, when I saw this every day during the pandemic, I realized why I'm doing this. So now every time he sees investors, he starts with that story. He tells them about the fact that he's developing this new technology because he wants that for his children. He wants that for the world. That promise that this horrible pandemic that we lived through, that promise that this brought. And because we can all imagine that story together, they understand his passion. They understand his motivation. And so he has a lot more success with these people. Even though they are financiers, he has a very technical story to tell. But just that story binds together all of us because we all understand this. We all want to live in this world. We don't want to live in that world. It's such a simple story. So, as you can see, storytelling is for all of us. Whether you are financiers, whether you are chemical engineers, whether you're advertising people, whether you're a baker, candlestick maker, whether you are Movify. So I hope that you will take this to heart and that you will be reminded. I'm sure you do every day, maybe sometimes not consciously, but hopefully this will remind you so that you do it more, and let storytelling help you just enrich your work in more ways. Thank you.
Thank you. If you have any questions, please use this makeshift microphone. Anyone?
I would love to hear more examples of the things that you've seen, maybe like great user experiences or other products, etc.
Thank you for this. It was very good. At the beginning of the talk, you talked about how Movify is probably an easier example because it's a small company.
Yes.
I work for a very big corporation. So while you can argue that, you know, everyone here in Movify share the same story, but me, for example, working in a big corporate, the CEOs, I feel a strong disconnect with the higher ups, and I don't feel that there's any kind of story that we are all sharing. So that's the part I didn't quite get as to how you can say that we're all part of, well, imagine Movify to be a big corporate. And
it's not difficult for me to imagine because I work for a big corporate.
yeah, and you can imagine how the higher ups have there's a disconnect between the higher ups and the people down there. So my question is, how can you say that it's all the same story when, to me, the higher ups, they're leading a completely different lives from the people down there?
So really, I speak out of recent experience. I completely understand what you're saying, and I agree. Sometimes in very large organizations, people are motivated by different things. So I think it is very hard in corporations. Corporations are not great ways of organizing humans together. But there are massive corporations in the world where when there is powerful storytelling, a lot of people do collaborate to make amazing things happen. And I'll give you an example, right? So a few years ago in South Africa, there was a very large bank, and they got an agency involved to help them with repositioning their brand. And they developed a new slogan, which was, I'm trying to remember the exact 3 words, but it was like faster, better, simpler. Okay, it was like 3 words like that, and it was what they were writing underneath the logo. They changed from a very old slogan to this. And what was important is they got the CEO involved, and the CEO believed this. So the CEO managed to start getting this into the organization. And this is incredible, right? There was a guy who was working on the animation screens for the ATMs. And on their ATMs, their teller machines, they had like an animation of a guy who would start up when you draw money, and he would walk with a little bag of money, like just looping while the ATM was calculating, was doing the transaction. And without telling anyone, the guy who made that actually made the little guy run. He changed the animation out of himself with nobody involved. He made that guy run. But that was an example of a massive organization who were able, because they had buy-in from the top, to make that happen. And arguably, I think organizations like Apple are able to build the products that they can because they are very good at understanding storytelling. The example in the video of Steve Jobs taking the iPod, taking it out of his pocket and saying, 1,000 songs in your pocket. 1,000 songs in your pocket is a story. But it works both ways. It works in one level towards a product design team who has to understand what they are making. Because if I say, I have this idea about like a music player that should be 1,000 songs in your pocket. If I'm the product designer, I know that it should easily slide into my pocket. It should have rounded edges, maybe a metallic finish so that it can easily slide into my pocket. But also towards the marketing team, they understand that this is about telling people that the benefit of this thing is that it's 1,000 songs in your pocket. But that's an organization that understands storytelling. And I think the majority of them don't. And it's up to consultants like you, with the clients that you work with, to try and propagate as much of the story as you can, and to use storytelling tools to help your vision propagate through an organization, through videos, through other storytelling techniques. I don't think it's impossible, but I do understand that it's hard because often people are motivated by other things.
based on finding the people. Sorry. Isn't it also based on finding the people with kind of the same mindset? I know when I joined Movify approximately 7-8 years ago, it was about finding that fit, finding the same mentality, and I think that's still one of our strengths to find people that join that can share our story and bring it to a much wider public, let's say.
But that's why small organizations like yours have a higher chance of maintaining your culture and your story, because I mean, maybe it's not even a conscious decision, but if you ask your leaders, I'm sure when they interview people, that's one of the main checks. It's not just about your skill, your talent. It's about, do you actually go along with the way that we think about work? And that's how you propagate. And so even like, I mean, I still now, I try and create a culture in my team of no assholes, right?
Yeah.
Because I think ego is one of the most destructive forces that there is. So like, even if a very talented person is sitting in front of us in an interview, but you detect that thing of, this person is not a team player, somebody who's out for themselves, we don't hire them, because one person like that will ruin your culture. So totally agree that it's easier for small organizations. When you start scaling, it's harder.
Yeah, it's harder, but that's
It's really,
if we all look at Apple, which is a company I think most of us in a way love. They are a big company, and they have, I think, the majority of their people are really all connecting to that same story. And the difference with them and us is they are a company of approximately 1,000 or more people with that same mindset. So I think it's even possible to, in larger companies, to find that one. But then it's up to our talent acquisition team, our higher up team, to really find those people out of bigger.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you very much, Leon, for sharing your story. I was captivated from A to Z.
Thank you.
200%. I hear your message that sharing a story is a superpower, and you clearly do have that superpower. You've demonstrated it. What would be your advice to us in the audience for the people that wants to acquire that superpower? I think we all agree that it is a superpower. It is powerful.
Yeah.
How do you train? How do you learn? How do you grow in terms of storytelling?
That's a great question, and I've thought a lot about it. So, so I think the first thing is that we all have it. You have to accept that we all have it, because that's what makes you human. But for sure, not everybody tells stories in the same way. So you have to always tell a story in a way that is real to you, right? And it's real to your experience, and it's authentic. Because I think the thing with stories is that the more real they are, the more powerful they are. That's a bit the thing with the story of my friend. Like, he could go stand up in front of like 100 financiers and pretend to be something that he's not, and say, you know, I've made this thing and it's amazing, blah, blah, blah. But he's not afraid to stand up there and say, I grew up in the south of Africa, and, you know, I lived in this dirty place. Because the moment he starts telling the story, he's real, he's telling a real story, and people connect with that because it's authentic. And if you can tell something, like, this is the thing, right, about stories, if you can take a very specific thing about your life and your unique point of view and make it applicable to many people, like find a universal truth, then that's power. That's the power of story. And that's the beautiful thing. You just have to know who you are. You have to understand you are born in a certain place that many other people have been born, but you were born to only those parents. And then you start making it smaller and smaller. And suddenly you realize, actually, it's not just something that you can print on a motivational poster. You really are unique. Nobody else in the world shares your point of view. But, so, here's the thing that I think is it's probably the most important thing in the world to remember, and that's maybe why stories are so important. All of us in this world are alone. And to some extent, we're lonely. Because being born in this world is scary. Like, it's a scary thing sometimes to be alive. There's a lot coming your way. And sometimes you hear somebody else saying something that breaks that loneliness, that makes you think other people experience what I'm experiencing. Maybe you struggle with anxiety. Maybe you struggle with ADHD, like me. Maybe you struggle with whatever. When you hear somebody else able to tell a story about their life that is the same as yours, you listen, because it breaks your loneliness. And that is the reason why AI can't make art. AI is useful for many, many different things. And I think AI will be getting more and more incredible. But the one thing that AI will never do is live a life. It'll never have real experiences. It will not know what it's like to really be in love or have your heart broken. That's why it will never write a story or a song about love and about heartbreak that is real. It can feel real, but it will never be real because you'll never be able to connect with that, because you know that that AI has never really experienced what it's writing about. And so if you remember that thing, that we're all lonely, and that in storytelling we find that connection, I think that's the power of connection. That's the power of it. And when you can bring it with your, like you're born in this country or you're born somewhere else, with unique parents, unique situation, everything else, then you can connect with other people in your way. You can be soft-spoken, you can be an extrovert, you can be very good at drawing or making videos, or very good at just sketching something or just telling something. I think it's all possible. And what I'm hopefully showing you today is that stories take many more shapes than just the usual. It doesn't have to be a video. It doesn't have to be a movie or a book or a game or whatever. It can just be me telling a story about my grandmother. There's an amazing video on YouTube, which I'll send you guys the link for, but it's Ricky Gervais who explains how he learned to write. And in that story, he says when he was writing essays as a kid, he thought he was writing the most amazing stories because he was writing like science fiction stories or cowboy stories, and he would get D or E, and he's like, no, I don't understand. But one day he thought he'd play a trick on his teacher. So he said that his mother, they had a neighbor, a very elderly neighbor, and his mother used to go there every afternoon to cook her lunch and just to help her clean up. And sometimes he would go along. And so one day, to play a trick on his teacher, he would show him or her how bad he can write. So he just wrote about visiting this old lady and about the way that his mother poured the tea and about the way she picked up the cup with her bony fingers and the way that they talked about just everyday things. And when he came back, it was an A, because he was able to relate something that was real, a real story that people can identify with.
It's about empathy, I guess.
Totally. Totally.
Something that worked for me the past year, I've been doing a lot of sketchnoting as a replacement for PowerPoint slides.
You're doing what?
Sketchnoting
Yeah.
as a replacement for PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
And I found that helped
Yeah.
capture the attention
Yeah.
a lot more because,
Yeah, I agree. We have a thing every 2 weeks where somebody presents like a story, and one of our creatives, maybe it was a year or two ago, she presented something from Miro. She just basically like took a whiteboard, she moved the thing around, and it was extremely powerful. This is a horrible format for telling stories, but it's useful in this context. But for meetings, whatever, like we've done meetings where you just go like, we're not going to show PowerPoint, we're just going to bring like magic paper, let's just make it a workshop, let's make it a talk, like metaphors, whatever, because it's weird, like this thing switches off your brain. I agree, totally. Yeah.
One last?
Thank you for your talk. And yeah, my question is, do you prefer to work with like small startup or like big corporation? Because I guess with startup is much more easier to just
Yes.
tell us a narrative.
Yeah. Okay. So I've also thought about this a lot. So I've worked in small companies where everybody has to do everything, and I've worked in big organizations. And the truth is the same truth of life with anything, whether it's about your relationships or about anything. Life is a game of trade-offs. It's a game of compromise. In everything that you choose to do in life, you're going to win something and you're going to lose something. And in every decision that you can consciously make, you have to decide, what are you willing to compromise for what you're willing to gain? In small companies, in small startups, you have a lot of independence. You learn a lot. You learn a lot of skills that you maybe didn't have before. You learn perseverance. You learn what it's like to not have cash flow. So you learn a lot and you gain a lot from that. But working in big corporations can have other trade-offs. So for example, maybe it's a little bit more comfortable in terms of like just the feeling of security or not. But then there are other things. So like, for example, you work in very specific applications, like you don't get to work on lots of different projects, but you maybe have access to bigger brands, bigger opportunities. So in everything, in every choice that you make, you have to decide what's the trade-off that you're willing to make. And that depends on your personal situation. That depends on where you are in your career. I think, like in the first 5 to 10 years of your career, you should do a mix. You should do a mix of startups and you should do a mix of big corporations so that you know the difference and you know what it is. And maybe naturally you'll gravitate towards something smaller, you'll naturally gravitate towards something bigger. But I think it's a game of trade-offs, like with anything.
Thank you.
Yes.
Don't you think that too many stories can kill the stories? We've been working for a company with a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And don't you think that I never worked for a product or something like that, but sometimes when you have so many stories, you can forget about the focus, which is sometimes the product.
Yeah.
And how you guys do you deal with it? Because, okay, there is the story, but there is what you have to do and to adapt to the user,
Yeah. It's not easy. I think to be user-centric and to actually know what you're doing is really, really hard. You think it's easy because people say, oh, you should think about like what the user wants first. And it sounds like the simplest thing in the world. It's like saying, I should get up every day and run 10 kilometers. It sounds really simple, but it's not. And I think even for big corporations, like let's say, for example, you work with a bank and you say to them, what would be amazing is if you could actually not have like savings connected to an IBAN number because, you can just make these cool wallets and you can just like people think in a different way. It all that's user-centric, but many of their systems could be connected to mainframes and whatever it's literally almost impossible to change. Like you can have the most beautiful ideas, but their legacy systems are so old or so difficult. And I think for many big companies, it's almost impossible for them to remember the user. They are so swept up in their own story. They are so overwhelmed with their limitations and their obstructions that they cannot fathom, they cannot put themselves in the shoes of the user. And that's why companies like yours have an amazing role to play, to keep bringing them back to that one story, bringing them back to what is it we're building it. And I tell you, like sometimes, like in a workshop, I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but sometimes you ask really stupid questions in workshops. You think, what is the most stupid thing that you can ask? Because I'm not afraid of asking stupid questions. Like if you say, you have like 5 people from a company, they're all in the marketing department, you think, it's like the 101 of their brand, like who is their audience? Like you ask them just that one basic question. Then they'll look at you like, are you crazy? And then they start answering, and then you realize all 5 of them had a different idea. All 5 of them. They don't know the same story. They don't. And then once they have that, then it's simpler. But yeah, it's the art of keep bringing them back to the same to the same thing.
Finding that specific point that bring all those stories together.
Yeah,
One point to have it all, because for me there are no stupid
No.
questions. Everyone here has a different story, but in the end, we're all together here for one point in that story
yeah,
that connects us all.
yeah. So like the one thing from the Hitchhiker's Guide, which is like the most profound thing, is in the story, there's this amazing thing about like they're trying to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything, right? And so they build a computer that takes 10 million years to calculate the answer. And then when he gets to the answer, he says the answer is 42. And they go mad, like, like, how can the answer be 42? And he says, well, you never told me what the question was. So like I have to build a more powerful computer to calculate the question, because the questions are harder than the answers. The answers are easy. The questions are hard. And sometimes they can be stupid. Really stupid. Hopefully a stupid one.
I hope it doesn't take a bit of a dark turn, but I was just wondering.
Don't worry.
There we go. Setting the story as well. But stories have been used throughout history to have a negative impact,
Yeah.
of course, to have influence on large groups of people,
Yeah.
whether it's to influence certain ways of
Yeah.
thinking.
We see it now
Um,
in the Middle East.
Every
Yeah.
day, every
Yeah.
day you see those stories as
Yeah.
well pop up, and those beliefs push forward. How would you counter that? Is it just a question of volume, volume against volume? What would you do to counter these more negative stories?
I take a stoic approach to this, and like you can only change what is in front of you. I think like anybody who's tried to engage with anything around, for example, what's happening in Israel and Palestine at the moment, like it doesn't matter what your point of view is. If you take an opinion on something, you may have. I've seen this story play out over the last month or two all the time. I have friends who just say, "How is it possible that so many kids can die in hospitals?" And then they get unfriended, and by friends of theirs that they've been friends with their whole lives. So like there's no in like a story like that, there's no winner, like because it's not rational anymore. And the only thing that I think, like if you go back to basic philosophy, like the core tenets of what every philosophy and religion tries to teach, I think, is just basic respect for one another. It's like the golden rule, right? Love yourself love others like you love yourself. So I think that that's probably one of the most powerful stories in humanity, is that we are capable of so much destruction. In that book that I referred, it shows you that. Like really, if you read some of the history about what the Spanish did to the Incas and the Toltecs, it's like it's incredible. What the colonists did to Australia, it's incredible. But we are capable of more, and I think every day you have to wake up as somebody who's creative and say, I'm going to create something beautiful and optimistic and inspirational, and whoever it touches, let's hope it touches somebody. And that you can only do with what's in front of you. Let's try and create meaning for people in the smallest things that they do. So I think if you're building a shopping app or you're building something, just try and bring something, because that's what's in front of you. Nobody of us can change the world, but we can all change a little patch of the world that we live in. Because you're right. I mean, in that book, there's an amazing example, which is like when the Crusaders went to go and kill people. It's the same Catholicism now. Like the mothers who sent their kids, who were okay with their boys going on crusades. Like today, they belong to the same religion, but today they would go say, "You're mad. My 14-year-old boy going to the Middle East to go kill people. I mean, are you mad?" But just like hundreds of years ago, it was the same religion, the same story, but it was okay to go on this. And if you don't come back with if you don't come back a hero, you might as well come back dead, and I won't even bury you. So yeah, stories can be very dark. I agree.
All right, thank you.
What a note to end on. Thank you. All right.
So thank you very much, Leon, for this,
Right.
this meetup and these insightful stories. You probably have a lot more questions to ask Leon, so I suggest we go to the bar, and I strongly advise you hang around because we have some chicken wings coming up. Well,
Thank you.
thanks.
For,
Appreciate
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.